Imagine a world for a moment that's just a pile of rocks. Nothing moving, nothing going on. Something maybe like a moonscape, maybe. You've seen all those pictures of the moon. Or maybe Mars, where there's just rocks and red sand. No life that we know of. We don't think about that when we think about creation. Yes, indeed, God created all those, the moon and Mars and all those things like that, all the rocks and all that. When we think about creation, we think about this world in which we live. We think maybe of a nice mountain scene where there are pine trees, and you can smell the pine trees and the little creek going through there with some trout in there and some birds singing and all that. Or maybe out in the plains where one of my favorite scenes is where the wheat or oats or whatever is about that tall and the wind is blowing and you can see the waves going through the fields out there and maybe a few crows flying over top or some meadowlarks. You don't have meadowlarks in this part of the country. Or maybe a nice beach scene. You've been to the beach where there's all the palm trees there and the fish out there in the ocean and people around. Even out here in the desert, the land is alive with all kinds of wonderful plants and animals and coyotes and road runners and lizards and all kinds of friendly little things out there. We don't think about all of the really tough places on this earth in which creation has touched. In South Pole, Antarctica, there's a fish there that can survive in below zero water. Not ice, below zero water. Because the blood is, it's basically antifreeze. It has an extremely high sugar content, which makes it not freeze when it gets below zero. Something actually lives in that kind of water. And if you aren't, a shudder doesn't go through your body right now, thinking about that. Or on the other end of it, the thermal vents that are out, I think they're out in the Pacific at the edge of the plates, where all kinds of nasty stuff comes up, where the water can be boiling hot. There's actually things living down there alongside of it. Creation just touches every piece of this earth of ours. Our Creator has touched so many different things. How great is our God? My first thought was, Jiminy, that's a lot of blueprints to follow. You imagine a blueprint for every creature on this earth? Must have a heck of a file system. And then I've always wondered about, I'm allergic to every source of vitamin C. Oranges, all those kinds of things. And I'm thinking, who figured out my blueprint? I need vitamin C, but I'm allergic to the things that, it's a question for God, I guess, one day. So there are things that sometimes we kind of wonder about. And sometimes they could get a little scary. Take a trip to Hawaii these days. It's a little interesting over there, where people see a little crack beside their house and get awfully nervous because they don't know what's going to start coming out of there. Or the Gulf Coast right now is sitting there waiting for Alberto. I don't know if it's a tropical storm yet or it was 45 miles an hour right now. So there are all kinds of things, and then we can get into really nasty things like cancer and things like that. And you kind of wonder, well, what in the world, where's all this stuff coming from? Martin Luther, one of my favorite lines out of Martin Luther's all of his quotes was, when you are afraid of the Father, the Creator, run to Bethlehem. Run to Bethlehem. Open that creaky door on the stable and peer inside so you can see Mary and Joseph and the baby, who is God come to earth. All that God is and ever will be was right there in the manger, defenseless, having to depend upon Mary and Joseph, being in the midst of all the spiders and the cat and the mice and all of these creatures. God as a baby. Why God as a baby? Well, we understand babies. We understand another human being, flesh and blood, bones, water, blood going through all the veins and arteries and all of this, laughing and crying. We understand all that. And here's God as a human being, so that God would understand what it's like to be a human being, and we as human beings understand that God understands what it's like to be a human being. God engaged us in that baby because we're human beings, and God came as a human being, yet fully God. So Jesus could take on all the hurt and pain and sin and everything else evil in the world, take that upon himself and die with that, so we could be forgiven. Then rise to new heights that first Easter morning above everything evil, so that we would be raised every morning. Jesus greets us every day with a new life. So, Father, Son, what's left? Holy Spirit, isn't it? That's the last one. Imagine again back to our rocky world. Now, imagine it a little further along, that things are created, but nothing's moving. No tree moves. The wind doesn't blow. The ocean doesn't move. No creature on this earth moves. That's the world without the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit enables and engages the whole world with the power of God, that power of life. Growing up on the plains, whenever I think of the Holy Spirit, and especially last week with the Pentecost story, I always think of the thunderstorms that come across the prairie that you can see for miles and miles and miles away, that they're building, and then they come with all that power. That's what I think of when I think of the Holy Spirit. Yet it's not in all that power of the storm and the hail and the rain and the lightning and the thunder and all that. It's the power to bring water, to bring life to the earth. I've told you before, your Hebrew and Greek lesson. Spirit in Hebrew is ruach, and in Greek it's pneuma. And you're very familiar with pneuma because any mechanic knows the pneumatic drill. That's where it comes from. Anyway, that word can mean spirit, it can mean wind, and it can mean breath. And you immediately think of God breathing life into Adam in that creation story. So, Holy Spirit brings motion, brings power, brings life to all God the Father has created. What an awesome God we have. What's this sign saying? How great is our God? That's a song, by the way. We're going to sing that someday. How great is our God? Yet, how much do we actually follow in the footsteps of God? How much do we actually think about all these ways that God comes to us? God the Creator. We have not done very well sometimes with all of that. There's actually two places out in the Pacific where it's actually called, it's not called a plastic island, it's called a plastic something or other. It's, they say, something close to the size of Texas, where all the junk from all the coasts and ships and all that, because of the currents, has a funny way of coming to that spot and staying there. And a lot of the plastic is all just in microscopic pieces, so it gets kind of just milky. And one of the ships had trouble, I don't know what happened to them, and they lost I don't know how many thousand pairs of shoes. And some of the shoes ended up there, and they ended up all over the place. It just shows us what we as human beings are doing. I would invite you Tuesday morning to walk the beaches of Santa Monica. I have. It is amazing what people leave there. We have not done well. Yet there are some really shining spots. We have learned how to recycle. I always think that's kind of funny because my parents were married in 1923, went through the 30s. They didn't call it recycling, they didn't call it repurposing, they just called it trying to make a living. Dad would have a machine that was broken, and he'd take it all apart and take all the strap iron, angle iron, bolts, nuts, everything out there and sort that all out and keep that. They did that. We're starting to do that. We're starting to think about that, about conserving energy and all that. So we're thinking about God's creation. We haven't done well in engaging each other as human beings. Do I really have to give you many examples about all the wars that we have fought? And thank you again to all the veterans and families. All the violence at schools and all these places that we have not really engaged each other as human beings. Yet there are shining spots. We had the opportunity for our 40th anniversary to go to Ireland, and we actually got to go to Northern Ireland. And if you remember the history of that place, it was not a very friendly place. We got to share a cup of coffee and a cookie in Belfast in the middle of all that, because they are at peace there. Then there was, you remember South Africa, apartheid. At the youth gathering in St. Louis, 30,000 teenagers in one place. I'll let you think through that for a second. 30,000 teenagers. And the speaker was Bishop Tutu. It was interesting. Of course, teenagers are going to be doing their thing. He did about 3 sentences, and the whole place turned quiet. They sat there and listened to him for probably an hour without moving. He is that engaging. He gave the story of when apartheid fell, they were trying in court some of the people that, well, some of the guards that had been truly nasty. And he was there. He said he could feel the animosity and the tension and all that starting to build in the room with this one particular guard that everybody knew. So he stood up and asked the judge if he could speak. And he said, "I can feel the tension. I can feel the hatred. I can feel what you want to do to this person. But if we do that, we are no better than anybody that persecuted us. And that was it. There are some shiny spots in how we engage each other and how we treat each other as human beings. I listened to the radio on the way up here. I was listening to Casey Kasem. Casey Kasem? Everybody's head is shaking. Okay, you know who Casey Kasem is. And a top 40 from, I don't know, it was 1980 something or whatever. Anyway, there was one of the dedications, and this lady had MS. And she thanked her mother and her brother and a friend of hers that helped her out. But particularly, I thought of the brother. She said, we grew up together, and he didn't do a lot of things that he could have, the baseball and the sports and all that, to come work with me and to play with me. So he was really there for me when I needed him. So we do engage each other as human beings. Yet, do we use that power of the Holy Spirit? That power that's given to us in the Holy Spirit. I don't know how many times I have asked people over 31 years. Wow, June 1st will be 31 years. Can you do this? And of course they come right back with the answer, no, I don't think I could do that. I don't have the ability, I don't have the time and all that. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, yeah, but it's the Spirit we're talking here. The Spirit enables us to do that, do those kind of things, to be a little adventurous and trek out into some space where we don't think we can actually tread. The Spirit will guide us. People are waiting for us, and we have been endowed by the Spirit with that power. So indeed, we have an awesome God. How great is our God that created us, that engaged us, that empowers us. How great is our God. So we were supposed to explain the Trinity, and you notice I never mentioned the word Trinity in the whole sermon, right? Did you keep track of that?
Yeah.
Because the Trinity is not something to be explained. The Trinity is an explanation of how God comes to us. How does God touch our lives? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. How great is our God. Amen.